I never expected to face something like this in my years of service. A darkness that seemed alive, stalking me every step of the way. Could I escape its grip, or was it too late for me? Join me as I relive the most terrifying night of my life. The night was as still as the grave. I remember the chill that crept in long before the dark clouds covered the moon. It wasn't the kind of cold you could feel on your skin. No, it was deeper, a cold that sank into your bones. I've been a nun for nearly 20 years, and I've faced death, sorrow, and the many shadows that roam the hospital halls at night, but nothing could have prepared me for that evening. I had been assigned to a small hospice wing of the convent, a place where we served the terminally ill. I had seen a lot in my years, prayers whispered at the bedsides of the dying, families grieving in silence, and souls wandering, unsure of what awaited them. Yet, one patient's name still rings in my ears all these years later, Father Gabriel. He arrived in the early fall, a frail, elderly man in his late 70s. At first, I thought nothing of it. Old priests, in their last days, were nothing new. They often asked for a nun to sit with them, to hear their confession, to offer comfort in their final hours. It was routine. But something about Father Gabriel felt different, off in a way that chilled my very soul. His room was on the far end of the hallway, the one closest to the old chapel. The chapel had always felt different at night, quiet, yet full of whispers that seemed to come from the very walls. I had brushed it off as my imagination running wild, until I met him. The first time I entered his room, the air was thick. I could taste the scent of something old, something decaying, but not from the usual hospital smells. This was deeper, like it had been lingering for decades. The man himself sat upright in his bed, his eyes wide open, but not seeing me. His gaze was fixed on the far corner of the room, as if something was there, something invisible to the rest of us. "Good evening, Father," I said, my voice soft but deliberate. He turned his head slowly, as though it took him effort to acknowledge me. When his eyes met mine, I felt a jolt in my chest. They weren't like the eyes of an old man. They were darker, more hollow. The blue had faded into an unsettling shade of gray, like the sky before a storm. "Ah, sister." His voice was soft, yet it had a strange edge to it. "I've been expecting you." Those words, I can still hear them echoing in my mind. He had been expecting me. How could he know? I had only been assigned to this wing that morning. There was no mention of me to him, and no reason for him to know my name. I made my way to the chair beside his bed, but before I could sit, he spoke again, his voice trembling. "You're not the first one. They've all come. They are watching me, sister." A cold shiver ran down my spine. I asked him who he meant, but he simply shook his head, his eyes returning to the corner, as though he had forgotten I was even there. It became routine after that. I would visit Father Gabriel each night. He would never speak much, only mention vague things, voices in the walls, shadows that moved when no one was looking, and whispers that seemed to come from the chapel at midnight. At first, I attributed it to his frailty, his mind deteriorating with age, but the more I sat with him, the more I noticed something else. His room grew colder, the temperature dropped inexplicably, even when the weather outside remained warm. The shadows in the corners of the room grew longer, darker, and each night his eyes grew more vacant. He seemed to be retreating deeper into whatever it was he had been seeing. I wanted to help him, but nothing I did seemed to reach him. One night, as I was preparing to leave, he suddenly grabbed my wrist, his grip firm despite his weakness. "You have to listen," he whispered urgently. "The doors are open. They're coming." I tried to reassure him, to calm him down, but his gaze became frantic. "You're not safe here, sister," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They will find you too." I managed to gently pull my wrist free and left the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew there was something wrong, something I couldn't explain. But what? And why me? That night, I went to the chapel to pray for peace. But as I knelt before the altar, I felt a presence behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a cold breath brushed against my ear. I turned around, but there was no one there. I thought I imagined it, but then I heard it, a low, guttural whisper, like a voice speaking from the other side of the world. The words were incomprehensible, but the tone was unmistakable, full of malice, full of hunger. I left the chapel in a hurry, my heart racing. I didn't feel alone anymore. Something was in the air. Something was coming. The next night, as I entered Father Gabriel's room, I was immediately struck by the change in him. He looked better. The hollowness in his eyes had faded, replaced by something darker. The room was even colder, and the shadows in the corners seemed to move. "Sister," his voice was different, no, low, almost velvety. "I knew you'd come. You always do." His smile was wrong, too wide, too knowing. Before I could respond, the door slammed shut behind me. I turned in shock, but when I tried to open it, it was as though the door was locked from the other side. I was trapped in that room with Father Gabriel. The temperature continued to drop, the shadows crawling closer. The walls began to creak, groan, as if the very building was alive. Father Gabriel's face twisted into a grin, but his eyes were no longer human. They were black, voids of nothing, reflecting nothing but darkness. And then I heard it whispering that voice, now unmistakable, now clear. They are here. I spun around, heart pounding, breath shallow. The walls seemed to pulse, the air thick with dread. The whispers grew louder, like a chorus of unseen voices, all calling to me, beckoning me to join them. The room grew darker, the shadows pressing in on me from every angle. My legs trembled, my prayers faltering on my lips. Father Gabriel's voice rose in pitch, now unmistakably demonic. You were never meant to leave, sister, and that's when I saw it. The shadows in the corners of the room began to writhe, twisting into shapes that defied logic. Figures, human-like but not, emerged from the darkness. Their faces were featureless, their bodies twisted, like reflections of death itself. Father Gabriel stood up, his frail form suddenly standing tall, towering over me. I warned you, he hissed. You didn't listen. Now they're here to take you. The shadows lunged. The darkness consumed me whole. I woke up in darkness, but it wasn't the same kind of darkness I had known before. It felt like the very air around me had thickened, suffocating, wrapping itself around my chest. My body felt heavy, and for a moment I thought I might suffocate in the stillness. But then, slowly, the weight of reality began to settle in. I was still in Father Gabriel's room. The temperature had dropped even further, and the shadows clung to the walls like living creatures. My heart hammered in my chest as I tried to move, but my body refused to obey. I wanted to scream, to run, but no sound escaped my lips. I was trapped in a prison of my own terror, unable to break free. It took me what felt like an eternity to gather enough strength to sit up. My surroundings were unrecognizable. The once familiar hospital room now transformed into something far more sinister. The walls were warped, bending as though the building itself had been twisted by some unseen force. The bed I had been lying on was now covered in a thick layer of blackened dust, and the crucifix above the bed had turned upside down, its face grotesque, its eyes glowing with an unnatural light. And then, I saw him. Father Gabriel stood in the center of the room, no longer the frail old priest I had once known. He was towering, his form shifting, like a shadow given shape, his features distorted beyond recognition. His eyes were black as night, filled with an infinite void. A chilling smile curled on his lips, one that was not human, not anymore. You've come to understand now. His voice was low, almost a growl, yet it resonated deep within me. You're the last one, sister. The last soul I needed. The last piece to complete the circle. My heart stuttered in my chest. I had no words, no prayers. All I could do was watch in horror as the room around me continued to change, shifting like liquid, walls collapsing in on themselves. The figures that had been lurking in the shadows now stepped forward, grotesque, nightmarish creatures, some tall, others crawling on all fours. Their faces pale, their eyes wide and vacant. They've been waiting, Father Gabriel continued, stepping closer to me, his form flickering like a dying flame. Waiting for you, sister. All this time, you've been here, just like them, trapped in the web, unable to leave. I tried to move, to fight, but my body remained still, paralyzed. The fear was overwhelming, suffocating. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I was locked in a nightmare, surrounded by shadows and creatures that didn't belong to this world. You're mine now, sister, Father, Gabriel whispered, his voice dripping with malice. We all are. The walls of the room seemed to close in on me, the shadows swirling around my body, and I could feel them pressing against me, their cold, skeletal fingers brushing against my skin. The air grew heavier, as though it were soaked in dread, in despair, in the very essence of suffering. I felt a pressure build in my chest, a weight so unbearable that I thought my ribs might crack. A part of me was screaming, but the sound never came, buried beneath the overwhelming force of the darkness that had consumed the room. I tried to pray, to call out to God, but the words never reached my lips. They were stolen, taken by the darkness. Father Gabriel's grin widened, and I could see his teeth sharp, jagged, like the maw of a beast. The creatures surrounding me began to chant, their voices rising, growing louder with each passing second, until it felt as though the very air was vibrating with their cursed words. The ground beneath me began to tremble, and the room tilted. I could feel myself slipping, my body losing control. I could no longer hold on to the small thread of hope I had left. The walls of the room started to warp, twisting into grotesque shapes, and the shadows were alive, reaching for me, pulling at my very soul. And then, just as I thought I was lost to this nightmare forever, I heard something, a sound, faint, but real. A whisper, almost drowned out by the chanting. A name, Sister Catherine. I snapped my head toward the voice, and there, standing in the doorway, was a figure, a silhouette, a shape I recognized. It was the chapel's priest, Father Benedict. He had been a comfort to me in the past, always calm and steady in his ways, but now his eyes, too, were darkened, like Father Gabriel's. He stepped forward, his gaze locked with mine. "You have to come with me," Father Benedict said, his voice distant, cold. "We have to stop them." The shadows seemed to recoil at his words, and Father Gabriel's smile faltered for just a moment, a flicker of uncertainty passing over his twisted face. "They can't stop us, Father Benedict," Father Gabriel hissed, his voice rising in a terrible crescendo. "The circle is complete. There's no turning back." But Father Benedict was not deterred. He extended his hand toward me, his voice steady. "Sister, you have to leave now. This place is not what it seems. They've been waiting for you, but you have the power to leave. You must." Something within me snapped. The weight of terror that had bound me to the spot began to loosen, the fog in my mind lifting ever so slightly. I could hear Father Benedict's voice, clearer now, calling me back to reality. My body still trembled, my soul aching with fear, but I could feel the strength of his presence, the force of his will. With every ounce of my being, I pushed against the suffocating darkness, reaching for his hand, feeling the cool, solid grip of salvation. The shadows hissed and recoiled, but I was no longer afraid. I took his hand, and with a final glance at Father Gabriel, I whispered, "Forgive me, Father." Father Benedict pulled me out of the room, and as we left, I felt the temperature rise again, the darkness retreating. The room behind me seemed to collapse in on itself, as though it were unraveling, the evil within it consumed by the light that Father Benedict had brought. We ran down the corridor, the sound of our footsteps echoing like a drumbeat in the heavy silence. Father Benedict's grip on my hand was firm, almost desperate. I could feel his urgency, the fear behind his calm exterior, but I also felt a strange sense of relief, a sense that the worst had passed, that the nightmare was behind us, or so I thought. The air outside Father Gabriel's room was different. It was warmer, almost suffocating in its contrast to the icy chill that had enveloped the room moments before. The hallway was empty, eerily quiet, as if the very life had been drained from the place. The nurse's station, usually filled with the hum of activity, stood abandoned. No one was there. I turned to Father Benedict, confusion filling me. "Where is everyone? Why is it so quiet?" He didn't answer at first, his eyes scanning the hallway, as if expecting something to emerge from the shadows. His lips pressed into a thin line, and for a brief moment, I saw raw fear in his eyes. "I don't know," he finally replied, his voice low and tense. "This isn't right. We need to get out of here." I followed him, the sensation of being watched growing with every step. The walls seemed to close in on us, and the flickering fluorescent lights above us cast long, unsettling shadows that danced in time with our movements. We reached the staircase that led to the chapel, the place I had always considered a safe haven, but tonight it felt anything but. As we ascended the stairs, Father Benedict's pace quickened, his hand gripping mine with a force that almost hurt. I could feel the weight of his fear pressing against me, and I could feel it in the air around us, thick and heavy, like a storm was about to break. We reached the chapel, and Father Benedict threw open the door. The silence inside was suffocating. The usual peaceful atmosphere was gone. The air was stale, the candles flickering weakly, as though even the light was afraid to burn too brightly. The altar was empty, but I felt someone standing there, waiting. "Father, what's happening?" I asked, my voice shaking. Father Benedict stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. He raised his hand, and I followed his gaze. There, standing before the altar, was a figure, but it wasn't Father Gabriel. It was something else, something darker, more twisted. The figure was tall, unnaturally so, its body hunched at odd angles. Its face, if you could call it a face, was a grotesque mask of pale, rotting flesh, its eyes hollow, black, and infinite. It was the same presence that had been in Gabriel's room. The same presence that had whispered in my ear. "We're too late," Father Benedict whispered, his voice trembling. "They've already begun." Before I could respond, the figure moved, its limbs jerking unnaturally. As it took a step forward, I froze, fear rooting me to the spot. The creature's eyes locked onto mine, and I felt my blood run cold. It wasn't just looking at me, it was seeing me. It was seeing everything I had ever done, every secret I had ever kept. "You shouldn't have come," the figure whispered, its voice hollow and unnatural. "Now, you're ours." I stumbled backward, but Father Benedict grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "Run," he shouted, pulling me toward the door. We sprinted out of the chapel, my heart pounding in my chest. I could hear the footsteps behind us, slow and deliberate, the sound of something unnatural following us through the hallways. We reached the stairs, but as we descended, I felt the air change again. It wasn't just the cold, it was the presence of something terrible, something ancient. I turned to look behind us, but the hallway was empty. There was nothing there. "Father," I gasped, but my voice trailed off as I realized something. The hallway had changed. The walls were different, the floor uneven. The building itself had shifted, warped, like it was bending and twisting around us. "This is it," Father Benedict said, his voice tight with fear. "They've pulled us into their world. We're trapped here." I felt a surge of panic, but I refused to give in. "We have to get out," I said, my voice shaking, but filled with determination. "We have to find a way." Father Benedict nodded, his face pale. "There is a way, but it's not easy. We have to confront what's here before it consumes us." Before I could ask what he meant, the floor beneath us began to shake. The walls groaned, and a cold wind howled through the corridor, rattling the windows. I grabbed Father Benedict's arm, my heart racing. "What's happening?" I screamed. "We're not alone anymore," he replied, his voice steady but laced with fear. "This place is alive, sister. It's feeding off us, off our fear." Suddenly, the lights flickered, then went out completely. The darkness was absolute, suffocating, a black void that pressed in from all sides. And in that suffocating darkness, I heard it, the whispers. "They are here," they said, their voices low, distant, yet so close. "And now, you will join us." The whispers grew louder, their voices overlapping, drowning everything else out. My heart raced, my breath coming in shallow gasps as the suffocating darkness seemed to close in on us from every direction. I could feel the air becoming thicker, more oppressive, as if something was pressing against me, trying to pull me under. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. But terror was too much. The darkness around me felt like it was alive, like it was reaching, stretching its tendrils into the very fabric of my being, trying to pull me into its cold, empty void. And then, I saw it. In the distance, a faint light flickered, a candle, barely visible in the darkness. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was something. "Father Benedict," I gasped, my voice cracking. "There's a light." He didn't respond at first, his eyes darting nervously around the room. But when he saw the light too, something shifted in his face. He nodded, the determination in his eyes hardening. "Stay close to me, sister," he said, his voice tight. "We can't let it get us." We moved toward the light, step by tentative step. The darkness seemed to pulse around us, like a living thing, following our every movement. Every shadow, every flicker of the light, felt like a threat. I could hear the whispers more clearly now, the words almost forming into something recognizable. But the words weren't meant for me. They were meant for us. "You can't escape," they chanted. "We've already won." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as the air grew colder, the temperature dropping so rapidly that I could see my breath misting in front of me. I turned to Father Benedict, but his expression had changed. His face was pale, almost ghostly, and his eyes were filled with dread. "They're getting closer," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We don't have much time." I wanted to ask him what he meant, but the words died in my throat as the darkness shifted again. The light ahead of us flickered, then dimmed, as if it was being snuffed out by something. My heart pounded in my chest as I quickened my pace, desperate to reach the light before it disappeared completely. But the moment I reached out toward it, the light went out. The world plunged into complete and utter darkness, and then I heard it, a scream, low, guttural, filled with agony. It wasn't mine, it wasn't Father Benedict's, it was something else. It was the scream of something lost, something torn from the world of the living. I spun around, my pulse racing as I tried to see through the darkness. There was nothing, no shape, no form, just the overwhelming sense that something was watching us. "Father," I cried out, but my voice sounded far away, as if the words were swallowed by the darkness itself. I could hear him though. He was moving, his footsteps hurried, as if he was desperately trying to find something, anything, to anchor himself in the madness. His breathing grew erratic, like he was struggling to hold on to his sanity. But then the silence, the kind of silence that suffocates, that presses down on you until you can't breathe. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, but it was the only sound. I reached out in the dark, trying to find him, trying to find anything that wasn't this oppressive void. And then, I felt it. A hand, cold, lifeless, unnatural. I recoiled in shock, the touch freezing my blood. But it wasn't Father Benedict. It wasn't anything human. My fingers brushed against something smooth, slick, like the surface of a mirror. But when I tried to pull away, it didn't let me go. I tried to scream, but my mouth was dry, the sound trapped somewhere deep inside me. And then, slowly, the light returned. But it wasn't the candle. It wasn't the faint flicker of salvation I had seen before. This light, it was different. It was blood red. The room around me began to take shape again, but it wasn't the hospital room I had once known. The walls were cracked, the paint peeling, as if the very building had been worn down by years of suffering. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the floor was littered with shards of glass, broken pieces of a once innocent place. And standing in the center of the room, bathed in that red light, was Father Gabriel. But he wasn't the same. His body was twisted, his form more skeletal than human, his once white robes now stained with black, as though they had been soaked in something darker than blood. His face was a grotesque mask, his eyes hollow, infinite pits of darkness that seemed to suck the very light around him. He looked at me, and I could see the hunger in his eyes. "You can't escape, sister," he said, his voice now a cold, mocking rasp. "We've been waiting for you." I wanted to run, but my legs felt like stone. The terror that gripped me now was unlike anything I had ever experienced. There was no escape, no salvation, no prayers that would save me. He stepped closer, his skeletal hands reaching out toward me. "They will find you, sister," he whispered, his voice a breathless hiss. "You are one of us now." Suddenly, Father Benedict's voice broke through the suffocating fear. "Sister, don't listen to him," he shouted, his voice breaking with panic. "We must fight, we must," but his words were cut off, as if the darkness itself had swallowed him whole. I turned to see him, but there was no sign of him, no trace. Just the deep, unrelenting silence. I was alone. Father Gabriel's form loomed over me, his hands now inches from my face. I could feel the cold of his presence, like ice against my skin. The shadows around us grew darker, the walls closing in, and then, the whispers returned. Louder this time, unmistakable. "You belong to us." I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But the moment never came. The darkness seemed to freeze. And then, with a terrible jolt, everything went silent again. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the hallway, standing at the base of the stairs. My heart was racing, my body trembling with terror. But it wasn't over. I knew that now, the darkness had marked me, and it would never let me go. The silence around me was deafening. I stood frozen at the base of the stairs, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. The hospital that had once felt like a second home now seemed alien-like. I was in a different world, one where nothing was familiar. The shadows in the corners stretched unnaturally long, and the air was thick with a suffocating weight. I wanted to move, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. It felt as though the ground itself was holding me in place, like I was tethered to this moment, unable to escape. The walls seemed to close in, the very air pressing down on me, and in the distance, I could hear them, the whispers, faint at first, but growing louder, their voices clawing at my mind. "You cannot run from us, sister." I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block them out, but the words echoed in my head, reverberating like the toll of a bell, relentless and deafening. The darkness pressed closer, wrapping itself around me like a shroud. I tried to speak, to call out to Father Benedict, but my voice was swallowed by the void. Then I felt it again, a cold, clammy hand slipping through the darkness, brushing against my shoulder. "Not him, sister. You belong to us." I whipped around, my heart hammering in my chest, but there was no one there, just the oppressive darkness, the empty hallway that seemed to stretch on forever. And yet, I could feel them, the presence. It was right behind me, so close, I could almost hear it breathing. They had been waiting for me. The shadows, the whispers, the dark figures that had crawled from the corners of Father Gabriel's room, they were real, and they wanted me. I broke into a run, my footsteps echoing through the hall as I fled from the darkness. The cold air nipped at my skin, my habit clinging to my body as if the fabric were alive, pulling me back. I could feel them following me, their presence closing in, their whispers growing louder, more insistent. "You cannot outrun us." I turned down a corner, desperate, but the hallway stretched unnaturally long. The walls warped, and the ground beneath me seemed to buckle and shift, like the very architecture of the place was changing to trap me. I was running, but I wasn't moving. The ground was no longer solid beneath my feet. It was like I was floating, suspended in a nightmare. Every corner I turned led me to a dead end, a hallway that twisted back into itself, like I was stuck in an endless loop of horror. I heard them again, the whispers. This time they were louder, more distinct. "We're coming for you, sister, and there's nowhere left to hide." I stopped dead in my tracks, terror freezing me in place. I turned, expecting to see them, the things, but there was nothing. The hallway behind me was empty. No figures, no shadows, just the stillness. And then I saw it. The door at the end of the hallway was slightly ajar. It was the same door I had seen in my nightmares, the chapel door. The door that had been the source of so much darkness, so much dread. The door I had been running from. I didn't want to go near it. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to turn around, to flee, to run far from that place. But something tugged at me. A force beyond my control. A pull I couldn't explain. Slowly, I made my way toward the door, each step heavier than the last. The whispers were growing louder again, and I could hear the faint sound of someone breathing on the other side. I reached for the door, my hand trembling as I pushed it open. The room was bathed in darkness, the shadows thick like smoke. But there, in the center of the chapel, I saw it, a figure. A tall, looming shape, cloaked in darkness, standing motionless at the altar. Father Gabriel. No, it wasn't him. Not anymore. His body was twisted, contorted, as though the very essence of his being had been consumed by the darkness. His eyes were black pits, empty voids that seemed to pull everything into them. And in his hands, he held a rosary, my rosary, the one I had left behind in my haste to escape. "Come closer, sister," he crooned, his voice like ice scraping against stone. "You have nothing left to run from." The air around me turned cold, freezing my breath. I couldn't move. My legs wouldn't obey. And then I saw them, the shadows emerging from the walls, slithering across the floor like living things, reaching for me, crawling up the altar, pulling themselves toward me. "No," I cried, my voice hoarse, desperate. "Please, leave me alone." But the shadows didn't stop. They swarmed around my feet, curling up my legs, pulling me toward Father Gabriel. He stood there, his grin wide and knowing. "You belong here," he whispered. "This is your fate, your true calling." I struggled against the darkness, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps, but it was no use. The shadows were stronger than me. They pulled me forward, toward Father Gabriel, toward the altar, and then, as if in response to an unseen command, the doors of the chapel slammed shut behind me. I was trapped. I wanted to pray, to call out for help, but the words were trapped inside me. The shadows pressed against me, pulling me closer to the altar, to Father Gabriel, who now seemed more monstrous than ever, his twisted face a mask of pure malice. "You're one of us now," he whispered, his voice a rasping, echoing sound that filled the room. "And there's no going back." And that's when I realized the truth, the terrifying, horrible truth. I was never meant to escape. The darkness had been waiting for me all along. It wasn't just a place, it was a part of me. I had been marked. And now, it was taking me. The darkness around me pressed in tighter, suffocating. As I struggled to break free, I felt the weight of it pulling me deeper into the void. Father Gabriel's twisted form loomed closer, the shadows curling around my body, their cold touch biting through my skin. But then, a flicker of light, weak, but undeniable, cut through the gloom. I couldn't move. My body was heavy, my breath shallow, but something inside me stirred. A final, desperate act of defiance. With every ounce of strength I had left, I whispered a prayer. The words came out jagged, but they were enough. They had to be enough. "Lord, save me." In that moment, everything stopped. The shadows recoiled, retreating into the walls. The oppressive weight lifted, just for a second. I could feel the grip of darkness loosen around me. Then, with a sudden force, I was thrown backward, crashing into the hard, cold floor of the chapel. The light blinding consumed everything, and when I opened my eyes, Father Gabriel was gone. The room was empty, but the whispers, they never left. The darkness had tried to claim me, but somehow I had escaped. For now, thank you all for joining me on these journeys. Your support means everything, and I love reading your reactions and personal experiences in the comments. If these stories kept you on the edge of your seat or gave you chills, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more haunting stories. Have you ever experienced something similar? Or perhaps you have your own unexplainable story to share? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Each of your stories adds another layer to our growing community of horror enthusiasts. And if you think someone else might enjoy a good scare, don't forget to share this video with them. Stay tuned for more spine-chilling stories. And remember, Sometimes the scariest tales are the ones that could happen to any of us. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, if you dare.